Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, January 18th of 2021. I have the hiccups, and I am also one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, and I've already am, saying sorry, the editor of this podcast, Trevor Starkey.
I mean, when we got on the Discord call, I heard that you had the hiccups. I was like, oh, I wonder how long those are going to last, because I remember one of the episodes you did with Cam last year, it was pretty much just the entire episode. Like your hiccups just survived the entire time. I'm just like, I don't understand that. I don't know how you swallowed that much air that it just can't you can't like break the hold.
It's the thing for me is that I actively dislike the hiccups. Like, I really hate them because when I get the hiccups, it's like a whole ass thing. Like, I don't understand how people have the hiccups for only like a 5-minute stretch. Like, when I get the hiccups, it's like for the entire day or for like an extended period of the day.
I remember that coming up and just being like, I don't even remember the last time I really had the hiccups. Like,
I don't have them, like, I probably have them like once every like 2 or 3 months, which I don't know if that's how common that is or not, but I will say that I think for me, one of the worst parts about having the hiccups is, oh, I have the hiccups, and like everyone within like a 15-block radius is like, oh, I have a like old wives' tale to like get rid of them, and it's like I've tried these things.
You've tried all of them.
I'm 29 years, and like the worst is always like, oh, it's like a spoonful of peanut butter. And it's like, oh, I've never thought of that. Or somebody walk at me like, have you ever just like hold your breath for 10 seconds? And it's like, I love the fact that in like the 29 years I've been alive, I've never been like, you know what I could do to fix the hiccups? Just hold my breath, and that'll fix it.
The
like,
thing
and
that every sitcom suggests.
Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about? Or like, oh, just scare yourself. And it's like, yeah, but like, I can't scare myself. That's not how scaring yourself. Like, it's like, okay, spook me. Like, anyway, I have the hiccups, but this is not a podcast about the hiccups.
Just a fun little kind of caveat or like tangent off of that is, I had the same sensation that you had right there when I was talking about my issues with Assassin's Creed Valhalla and the bugs I was having that were keeping me from the platinum. Yeah. Like, I tweeted that out a couple times when I was facing that, and people that like don't follow me at all and just like seem to be regularly searching Assassin's Creed Valhalla were like responding to my tweets with suggestions and like, hey, did you check this forum? Did you try this? Here's a trophy guide for this thing. I was like, I've looked at everything you guys are talking about. I assure you, I went to all of these other places and these other resources before I bothered posting it to Twitter to say hey, this is annoying me. But at the same time, I do want to thank those people because they were trying to help, and it's coming from a good place. And a handful of times I just kind of responded, I was like, yep, I tried that, and just no fail or to no result. And some of them it was like, I've tried the exact same thing you're telling me to try, and it's just bugged or it's just glitched. It's just not working. But it was like, ultimately when I was finally able to get those trophies popped, it was like I went and checked yet another Reddit thread that was like, hey, try this thing. I have no idea why it works, but it worked. And then there was like a string of like 4 or 5 people that were like, oh my God, that has been bugging me for so long. Thank you so much for, and I was like, all right, I'll go try this. And it didn't work as expected, but like a deviation of the thing worked. And I was like, well, I'm fucking done with this now. Fuck this thing forever. But yeah, it's that same sense of like, the whole world seems to know how to fix your problem. It's like, you don't though. You can't. You kind of don't.
And it's funny too because, like you said, like whenever someone does it for a game or for the hiccups, it's usually coming out of a place of like, like, oh, I want to just like help out and offer this suggestion, but it's always a thing of like, but if I'm putting it out there, I've probably tried at least 1 or 2 things, and I just love how it's like, because if they're like getting really into the weeds, because I've also like put it out on Twitter about like, oh, I'm stuck at like this game, or like, especially back when I was doing Zelda 1, I'm like, oh, I'm stuck at this spot, or even for Bloodborne, for both of us, for where I'm be like, all right, like, I'm not figuring out how to get past this boss, or how to get past this like enemy, or whatever it might be. And like the people will always be like, oh, did you ever just try like IGN's guide? And it's like, yeah, like I went to the biggest video game website in the world's guide first, probably. Like that's probably the first spot that I checked, and I had a difficulty figuring out this thing. And I know that they're like being totally sincere, but it's always just like, I love the thought process in their mind where it's like, oh, he probably hasn't tried anything. He's just been really frustrated. The tweet is said for like 3 hours. He probably just been like, I'm just going to keep trying without looking at anything else here. And it's like, that's not how I work. Like, if I get stuck, I'm going to look at some other basic sources.
It is sometimes you just want to complain about a thing. You're not looking for the solutions of the world.
This is also like a basic, like relationship thing that I feel like they usually tell.
It's very much the sitcoms, the sitcom
who want to like solve every problem, but it's like sometimes I just want to complain that this thing is maybe not designed great, B, maybe obtuse, Zelda, or C, I just want to complain. Like this is part of what Twitter exists for, is for me to complain about this thing. But nonetheless, we could do a whole podcast about that. But alas, we have to get back to our favorite topic of that news you care about. And this is a Cyberpunk podcast tonight, kids. Trevor, there have been some happenings in the last week or so now. Last week was wasn't necessarily a regular podcast. It was a kind of look forward.
Yep.
What has happened in the world since we last spoke about Cyberpunk?
Well, everything that we kind of have on the table today did happen in the last week since our last episode, so it wouldn't have like come up anyway last week. But so the big the big thing that maybe kicked this all off, even though they were obviously happening simultaneously, would have been the co-founder of CD Projekt, Marcin Iwinski, I believe, put on sat down and recorded like a 5-minute video, basically apologizing for everything, all the issues with Cyberpunk, and kind of like in I think his own words, like owning up to the problems, and talking about some of the issues that they had kind of surrounding everything. Very much saying like, don't blame the developers, blame like us and the leadership team and the board. But at the same time, throwing kind of the QA testing under the bus by saying, like, we just didn't find these things in testing. And it's like, maybe you didn't, like, do proper testing. So that was, like, part one of the story. Part two of the story was Jason Schreier did a very Jason Schreier story for Bloomberg, that pretty much reads like any of his other kind of crunch stories. Is he interviewed 20 developers, past and present, most of them under the condition of anonymity, talking about how like people knew inside the studio that game wasn't going to be ready for prime time. It was not ready for release in 2020, and talking about a lot of the issues surrounding it. There's a big focus on kind of the vertical slice nature of the E3 demo that was shown off originally back in 2018, and the amount of time and effort that went into that demo that took away from core development of the game, and it kind of like reopened that conversation that is very reminiscent of stuff like Colonial Marines or No Man's Sky kind of pre-launch, like when is it okay for a game's features that get shown in like a pre-release kind of trailer, and then those game features end up getting cut? Like, how is that properly communicated or whatnot? That kind of conversation flared back up. And then, despite, I would argue, so I'm looking at the Bloomberg article, and in the fourth paragraph of the Bloomberg article, Jason writes, CD Projekt declined to comment on the process or provide interviews for this story. A day later, Adam Badowski of CD Projekt Red basically came out and responded directly to Jason's article via like a tweet. Basically, he wrote a big old like post kind of responding to, like, picking and choosing what he wanted to respond to and responding to it. And fuck anybody that does that. Like, you were given the opportunity to comment on the record on this story. Like, Jason, as the journalist, reached out, and asked you to provide comment, and you and the company refused to provide comment, only so you could go around and kind of do this extra, little bit here and there after the fact. I am so sick of developers and publishers and the marketing kind of teams doing that kind of thing in these kinds of stories. Like, basically, you had every opportunity to comment and you did not. So, like, nobody should be giving the actual comments you're doing after the fact a second glance. but obviously here we are talking about it on the on this episode.
I think so. There's obviously a lot to unpack. I think starting with the apology video, it's such a interesting tale of two videos almost. Like in that video, there's a seed of a good apology video where it is like him taking the blame on like himself and leadership and like the board and like it being like, the buck stops with us. Like we're ultimately responsible. We're in charge here. It's our fault. Like that could have been a good apology video. Like no apology video is gonna be like perfect, obviously in the end because it's such a mess. But like it would have at least been like, all right, cool. Like that's a good apology video and like they're kind of owning it. It is just that kind of second act where they go like, and like I don't know how our testers kind of didn't pick up on it kind of thing. That made it, I think, pretty immediately. I felt like almost the entire time I'm just kind of reacting to them throwing the QA team under the bus there.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things for me where a lot of times when either studios or publishers or just like regular people in the real world do like kind of like a PR apology video and they mess it up, it's because they're shitty people and they're not meaning it, or because the apology is just whatever. But every now and again you have what I think happened here, which is just it's such an unforced error. Like you never had to even get to that point. It could have just been like, it's our fault, leadership team's fault. We didn't handle it correctly. We didn't manage it correctly. The buck stops here. We're in charge. We're going to do better in the future in the video. And people would have been like, okay, whatever. And it probably wouldn't have been talked about that much, but at least it would have been like, that's maybe the best you can kind of hope for is they kind of own it.
Mm-hmm.
It was totally unnecessary to ever get to the point of them like mentioning the test and QA and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a thing for me of, I can't almost rationalize how they thought that would be perceived, because clearly he didn't ad-lib that fucking thing. Like somebody clearly had written.
No, it is
like,
very clear
like,
he's reading that whole thing from a prompter.
Yeah, and so it's like somebody had to write that out. Multiple people probably had to read it, including maybe a lawyer, and then be like, "That's it. Yeah, that's the one." And it's like so many channels failed in that PR message, and that to me, I feel like is one of the biggest themes of Cyberpunk these past few months, is just so many unforced errors, like doing so many things you didn't have to do that are just making people more upset. Like if you just like, and totally unnecessarily, like you didn't ever have to mention QA testing and it being part of the mistake. And it's like,
and
just
to be clear, I don't think he does mention QA in the video.
He doesn't mention, no.
It was more, there was like a companion post with it of like, here's our commitment to, turn things around. And it's basically an FAQ page. And the FAQ, one of the answers was more like, well, didn't you catch these things in testing? And they basically said, no, we didn't catch these things in testing. It's like, well, you kind of did, or you didn't do enough testing then, because so that's really where the whole QA, at least because in watching the video, I watched the video after I saw like the reaction to everybody kind of talking about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the reaction was talking about how the video is more or less just tone deaf, and it is just kind of blanket, boring, dull corporate apology kind of thing, and the real kind of like throwing under the bus was more on that like page of, yes, our testers just didn't find these things, or we're finding things, we just weren't able to fix them in time, basically was kind of the FAQ portion that ultimately does throw the team under the bus. Even like its leadership is, taking the blame and saying, don't blame our developers. That's for us to do. We're going to blame our developers. And it was a big old load of crap. And very much like unforced, because to your point, like, just own it, apologize, and that's it. End the video there. Don't do the but here's what happened. Or
Exactly.
Or if you're going to do that, then you do it the other way and you say, we have the utmost respect for our developers and our QA testers who were continually finding things that we were trying to fix. We, as the leaders, thought we had a better timeline of how we could fix those things, and we clearly did not. We clearly failed. That's how they could have kind of spun it, so to speak, in that, while still acknowledging that their teams were doing everything they could. And still taking ownership to the fact that this thing, and I can't even say failed, because as the Schreier article points out, and as we've touched on before, 13 million copies, they're doing just fine, and that's where there's really the tale of two CD Projekts, kind of taking that metaphor, is on a PR side of things, this is a disaster for people who follow this stuff closely enough. And people like us that podcast about it, or people that are, following all these accounts on Twitter and all that stuff. But clearly so many more people bought the game, still own the game. They might be a little annoyed by the experience of the game, but they still made CD Projekt a shit ton of money. So that's why I imagine we haven't seen heads roll at the company. With a PR disaster of this kind of level, you would expect some kind of announcement saying, these heads of the company and CD Projekt have decided to part ways, and it'd be in corporate speak of they've resigned. We wish them the best, whatever all that stuff is. It's not going to be public firing and all that stuff, because that's just not how it works at that level, unless it's incredibly egregious. But I imagine at their board meetings, they're still looking at their kind of their revenue sheets and saying we'll weather this storm and people will be mad with us for a little while, but we made a shit ton of money in December. So,
I think for me, right, that's it. Right, I think a big part is, that's kind of always bugged me. I mean, it's bugged me about the whole industry for a long time, but it's just nobody takes responsibility for things, right? And to be fair, you can argue a lot of this is because the point you just made, they sold 13 million copies, so it's a messy thing. But and maybe it's just because I just watched this clip online recently, but it's I think of The West Wing, right, where Bartlett gets he agrees to get censored, right, and it's just people don't take responsibility for things anymore. People don't just say I'm wrong, we were wrong, we made a mistake, and it's especially right now in 2021 and everything that's going on right now, it would almost be so refreshing, and such a I feel moment of actual honesty and candidness if somebody was just you know what, we were wrong, we didn't handle this right, we were wrong to rush this out, we were wrong to put so much extra work on our team, we were wrong to say we weren't going to crunch and then do mandatory crunch, we were wrong to do all of these things, and it made a lessened product, right? This isn't the game it could have been, this isn't the launch you wanted, all these kind of things, I don't know, I think it would have garnered a lot of really good goodwill, and at the very least, it would have actually been, probably closer to the truth of the situation and the reality of that. And I don't know, I mean, again, this is almost now more of a damage to corporate America in general, where nobody can ever be wrong, and Trump's America in general, where nobody can ever be wrong and admit fault. But it'd have been such a refreshing moment, because they are such a big, giant entity that they've been look, we're going to own up to this. We were wrong. It is on us. It is a failure of leadership and management, and we apologize for that deeply. And I think it could have been a really cool moment for that, right? And I say this because I always say that I think a studio like Naughty Dog is another one who has such a large platform to actually take a stand on crunch and workplace culture and all this kind of stuff, and they could use that. Neil Druckmann is in a unique position to be look, we were wrong to kind of have the studio be like that, right? We didn't recognize it at first. It was just what it was. Like that's what Naughty Dog was for years, and like we didn't recognize the warning signs, and we didn't recognize kind of how destructive it was to people's lives, but we do now, right? And we're taking actual concrete steps at like Naughty Dog to improve the culture and to make sure that we aren't doing the same mistakes again. And like CD Projekt Red, I think could have had a similar thing. Like, and some of the stuff I would think.
I would just want to interject. Like, yes, that would be an idealized version of Neil Druckmann to say that, though.
Or any studio.
That is your most optimistic, most like you want to put Bartlett.
Yeah, and it's not even me saying
Neil
that
Druckmann
it's gonna happen, right? But like,
yeah, that's I just want to highlight that because honestly, based on like everything we've seen, I don't think Neil believes that. So that's why I don't think we see that from Naughty Dog, and I don't think Evan Wells I don't think Naughty Dog believes that kind of philosophy, given that they've been doing that for 20 plus years as a studio. So like as the conversation is changing, I wish they would see that and kind of make those revelations. But as you know, the last few games that they've spat out seem to, you know, all kind of share that same story behind the scenes. Yeah. I just don't think like you're going to see them as be able to make that statement. And so that's where like looking at, you know, your Insomniacs who do try and go out there and kind of talk about that stuff, or obviously Supergiant is somebody that we touched on a lot recently and has been celebrated a lot for that. Like those are the studios that like we should like we on our side of kind of the punditry or whatever should be really more, you know, celebrating and stuff and continually kind of hold the others to task when we hear about these kinds of crunch stories. Like the biggest things that annoy me out of this whole week's worth of Cyberpunk stuff tends to be the fact that like Jason interviewed 20 people who kind of all seem to, you know, support and say like crunch is an issue at the studio. And then Adam Badowski comes out and completely dismisses that because Jason only talked to 20 out of the 500 people that worked on on Cyberpunk 2077. He's basically like, that's hardly a most of the developers. It's like, fucker, sample sizes are a thing. Like if he talked to 20 people and 20 people said crunch is an issue, yeah, he didn't have the, you know, ability or bandwidth to talk to everybody on your on your studio, but I don't imagine like the dismissive nature of Adam Badowski is like the biggest argument that he should be the one that has to basically like eat crow, fall on his sword, and leave the company because he clearly is not learning anything from this. That he's going to go out there and like write this thing in response to Jason's article instead of commenting on the record prior to publish. That like
I don't think anyone's leaving though.
Oh no, exactly. I don't think so either because I think he made them a ton of money and he's you know, high enough in that company and protected enough in the company. I mean, like last year especially, there was like a ton of those kinds of like come to Jesus, like, oh, things are just never going to change. Like all the stuff that went on with Ubisoft. Yves Guillemot, there we go.
Yeah.
Is either an incredibly incompetent CEO because all that was happening right under his nose, or he was actively protecting all those people. Either of those scenarios should demand his resignation. The board should say, you are not the person to be leading this company. But again, the board's also going to look at their you know, returns on investment and say, well, he also makes us a shit ton of money, so I guess we can look the other way for this. And it's just like, fuck capitalism. I guess is what this all comes down to.
I mean, this is going to be a fuck capitalism podcast, but I mean, it's one for me where it's just, I mean, Ubisoft is a great example too, actually. Yeah, I mean, where, or even more so than Ubisoft, right, is like Quantic Dream. And like David Cage, right, like the Sun King himself. And it's like the stories around the toxic nature of that team are like legendary, basically. I mean, like I feel like we spoke about it all of the time on Input. And so where's Quantic Dream? They're probably making another game because, you know, Heavy Rain did great. Detroit Become Human did good enough to make another game. and Detroit for sure did good. And so it's like, yeah, like that's what they're ultimately looking at. And again, this goes back, and now we're veering into like, again, going back into like why you should have people who aren't just like white bros in their 50s inside boardrooms, because this is another thing, right? Like, change is coming to these boardrooms, but they can hold on for quite a while they're making millions of dollars in profits.
Yeah.
And and especially for them, that's an easy call, right? It's like, oh, I mean, like, that is a bit of bad PR for a month.
Yeah.
But also brought in
people have ridiculously short attention spans. Like,
yeah, even more so now, right? Like that's the thing where it's like Ubisoft is, and Quantic Dream and CD Projekt Red are all great examples where, yeah, like people get really upset about them, and then the game will come out, or a new trailer for the game will be shown off, or a preview will come out, and people kind of go, but like ultimately, I'm gonna play this probably.
Yeah,
I have to see what happens next.
The industry is too splintered, and the people that should hold entities accountable don't, and so. Yeah, like all the stuff with Ubisoft happened, and to enact real change, any big site that had been reporting all those issues with the Ubisoft should have basically said, hey, we're not going to review Watch Dogs Legions, we're not going to review Assassin's Creed Valhalla, like we're not going to reward your terrible lineage of abuse with coverage, positive or negative. You're just not going to get it from us until you show us signs that you're actually trying to turn things around. But the industry is never going to do that. Like, your IGNs, your GameSpots are never going to get behind that kind of thing, so that it doesn't, for the mass on it. Because again, like the niche section of the gaming community, like that follows this stuff closely enough to know any of this. It's why Ubisoft repeatedly refused to include any kind of like reference to any of that stuff in their big Ubisoft Forward things last year. It was like, well, we can respond to that as like a 4-minute video outside of the 2-hour presentation, because then we can say like, look, we are doing something, but we're not going to muddy the waters and expose everything that's going. We're not going to expose our dirty laundry to everybody that's just tuning in because they want to know what the next Far Cry looks like, who has no idea what has been going on behind the scenes at Ubisoft. So why would you want to open their eyes to that? That's what's going on at those companies. And when like your big sites just kind of let them, get away with that, we're not going to see any kind of change. So it's frustrating. And the people that are trying to, hold them to account, like us or whatever, like I still played Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I still played, Immortals Phoenix Rising to be part of the conversation. But at the same time, I do at least try and measure my like commentary on them, where I at least try and remind people of like, hey, Ubisoft is still doing shitty stuff. And again, it's especially hard at Ubisoft because we have like friends personally that work there and stuff.
Yeah.
And again, I know that they're trying to change things from within and that kind of stuff. But, in the same way that, I've tried to change things at organizations I've worked at in the past and to no avail. So, unless you're in a position of power like Yves Guillemot, it's really hard to try and do.
Not even that, but I mean, to the earlier point that I kind of want to talk on for a second is even at big sites, right? Like Lucy O'Brien, the Lion over at IGN, had a thread last week, I think, and it was in relation to a few different parts, but part of it was like why they spend so much time talking about like indie games or stuff like this on Podcast Beyond. Whenever people talk about like, why don't you just make it like its own written thing? And she was talking about because they'll get like a fraction of the views if we have a standalone thing. And that's why she talked about like having like including commentary like in reviews itself, because they know that's where the eyes will go. Like, and she was like, I mean, there are times we'll write like, and I can't remember, and somebody else talked about it, and then like somebody else joined on about Kotaku too, and they were going back and forth about like how like they'll get like a couple thousand views at Kotaku for like just an indie game preview, versus 100,000 plus on like a AAA game, right? And it's like, this is why, because they also understand that we could spend all our time talking about workplace culture at Ubisoft and workplace culture at Naughty Dog and workplace culture at CD Projekt Red, but I mean, we have
the
evidence
ad
to show
model
that
won't sustain itself.
Yeah,
We won't get the clicks that we need to pay for.
You guys aren't
the
looking
staff.
at it, right? And when people ask like, why aren't we writing about more indie games? They're going to say we're writing about a lot of indie games. Actually, people just aren't reading them. Like, that's the thing. Like, that's why we spend a lot of time talking. That's why you have 15 pieces on GTA 5 online versus one about Raji and Ancient Epic, right? It's because we know what people are going to read, right? Or why they do the like weekly update on like what new games are coming out. It's because we know what people are going to read, and that isn't necessarily always, or even a majority of the time, maybe the most kind of thoughtful and informed and kind of illuminating conversations and stories, but also they have to keep their lights on too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all kind of a balance of like how they try to get that real news and have those actual conversations and make sure people actually listen to them and reading them and hearing them.
They just the industry just needs to start doing like BuzzFeed style listicles of like the top 10 abusive game companies. You'll never believe who's number 3.
Yeah, it's right. Have it just at the bottom of every article. I mean, that BuzzFeed's an interesting example, and not to get like too far down the rabbit hole of like journalism now, but BuzzFeed's an interesting example of a company that did that shit. Obviously, that's what BuzzFeed is known for. But then it allowed them to ultimately like build up a like pretty legit like news organization in their own right? And like it's because they got all those people paying attention and all the ad revenue from all the quizzes of like
that
what
like,
Disney princess are you?
Yeah, all the free quizzes that like contributors made for them with no pay and all that stuff. So that's a whole other issue is BuzzFeed. But it's like the whole like online and accessibility drastically changed journalism and a whole breadth of other fields. Facebook went even further when they completely butchered and doctored their numbers and kind of skewed ad revenue and had like entire brands change their business model based off of the numbers that Facebook was quoting them, which it turned out were complete bullshit. And industries died. Many sites died because of that. Like your College Humor and that kind of stuff. Like obviously they're sort of pseudo like trying to bounce back as like a small independent kind of thing. But like I remember seeing like College Humor basically like closing down, and it a lot of people basically like citing back to, well, yeah, like when we were articles and stuff like that, we were doing fine, and then Facebook came to us and said, well, here's all the metrics around our videos, coverage, and so your College Humors, your IGNs, your like all of your sites started moving towards like video stuff to post it on social media channels like Facebook, and it was all a lie. Like it obviously like not completely, because like people are more inclined to catch a 5-minute video maybe than they are to read an article or something, but the amount of time and effort that goes into making that compared to making the article, drastic difference in cost, and turns out didn't have the return on investment that again Facebook notably was promising. And Facebook still gets to just kind of exist with no with no oversight because again, fuck capitalism and politicians
the filibuster.
Not even the filibuster, but like just politicians are so out of their depth when it comes to technology that they can't even try and begin to police something like Facebook. They just like
almost like we shouldn't have the oldest Congress in like American history being in charge of a revolution in how information is disseminated to the masses. And try to tell these, like, Mark Zuckerberg is still only like 35 probably, and so he's like 50 years younger than the guy in charge of like the whatever committee that is overseeing social media networks. So it's like it's the same thing whenever we see the like laughable videos of whenever like Zuckerberg or like Jack Dorsey or any of these guys get brought in front of like a congressional panel, and they just have half the people have no idea what the fuck they're even asking. Like, no, they don't even know what, like the questions they're saying. They don't even know what that means. And it's like, yeah, like almost like these aren't the people that should be making the laws to govern this stuff. Yeah. But I digress.
Yeah, that was a big old weird tangent from the Cyberpunk stuff.
It was a good tangent. I liked it. It was a good segue. Trevor, do you have any final thoughts on CD Projekt Red or just the American government at this point?
I mean, I'm real annoyed. The other aspects of kind of the updates from CD Projekt. Another one of the big things that continues to piss me off with how they're spinning it is that they're blaming this on the old gen versions of the game, and as is pointed out in kind of the Bloomberg article, like when they originally announced a release date, they originally announced April of 2020 is when that game was supposed to come out, before the next gen consoles were ever announced. So like the next gen consoles were out for 3 weeks, so they can't, like, CD Projekt doesn't get a pass on, like, they were building it for the old gen consoles. They were building them terribly for the old generation of consoles. And the fact that now they're saying that the next gen versions aren't even, which they've also come out and said, like, the next gen versions are actually pretty good, but they're coming out and saying that those are probably not going to be available and ready until second half of 2021 is just another, like, that whole game should have just been fall 2021. And they would have avoided so much of this hassle. They would have gotten
they had to hit their
more money. They would have
earnings,
gotten,
though.
They would have gotten another year's worth of, like, hype buildup and buying into pre-orders and stuff. Like, they would have been fine. Somebody just got antsy and pulled the trigger on saying, like, nope, we got to get it out here before the end of 2020.
I'm currently reading through Barack Obama's memoir, A Promised Land, over, like, his first term in office.
Part 1, yeah.
And in that, what?
I said part 1.
Yeah. And in that he obviously goes over the financial crisis. And in that he talks about how, like, through a series of kind of deregulations and all this kind of stuff, like, companies nowadays are designed to really only think about short-term interest and earnings over long-term because of everything involved in how the American financial system works nowadays. The people need their kind of money immediately. And what this leads to is CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk is a great example of this. Like, they could have absolutely had a better product that would have, in the end, sold more copies, probably had more people excited about it if they had waited a year. But they needed that money now. They needed money for the quarterly's earning. They needed it probably for the yearly financial, like, they needed all this stuff now to look good for the investors, so they could get, the board members could get whatever bonus, whatever they wanted to need. Like, that's how companies are designed to think. I mean, even Nintendo, I mean, like, whether or not it's because it just happens to fall on the end of the quarter or not is what it is. But, like, let's just say that, let's just be cynical and say that's why they're picking that date. It's because, yeah, they want to hit that date. They want to get as much money as they can for that quarter. And so these are how companies are designed to think nowadays. Again, this is just a real good fuck you capitalism podcast, but, like, this causes lots of problems even in our, dumb video game industry. Like, it has real issues because it leads to stuff like this, among other things.
Yeah, I've brought up the repeated issues that we've seen with, like, BioWare's games from EA.
Oh God, yeah.
Going back to
EA's
Andromeda.
Obviously one of the worst, but yeah.
Yeah, like Andromeda was like, they clearly had to get that out before March 31st and said, well, fuck it, we'll just patch the game for the next 6 months after the fact. And so obviously, like, CD Projekt Red is basically just taking notes and copying that same formula. Anthem was the same kind of thing. Like, and most likely, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition is going to be the exact same thing of, like, we're going to get that out in March. Hopefully it'll be in a good enough shape, but if it's not, at least we've got that money in our books for March 31st for those fiscal calls, and we'll continue patching it after the fact because gamers are going to buy the game and they're going to, they might complain for a little bit, but, like, they don't, like, the whole vote with your wallet thing. Like, I remember, like, when I would espouse kind of vote with your wallet, that's how, like, vote with your wallet doesn't work, because vote with your wallet doesn't convey the message that you think it's conveying. Like, if I go to a store, there are a million things I'm not buying, and those companies don't know that I'm not buying them because I'm not interested in those things versus because I'm making a stand or something. Like, that messaging is not ever relayed up the chain through voting with your wallet. So, like, that's the fallacy of voting with your wallet and that whole, like, mantra.
I think you said it very well. The final thing I'll say is just, that's the thing, right? Is this short-term gain over long-term interest is the video game industry is the perfect example of that, in terms of just like, yeah, like, we'll put this game out now and it'll get like a 7.5 to 8 Metacritic kind of thing, like in that range, or 75 to 80 Metacritic.
And then we don't have to pay the bonuses that we like tie to Metacritic
and
scores.
It'll fall somewhere in there, so it'll be like a good enough game, and it'll maybe it sells only 90% of what it could have sold if we'd waited a year. Maybe it only sells 90%, or maybe it does really bad. Maybe it only sells 80%. We're for sure getting that 80% now, and we can just patch it later on, and more people play the like Ultimate Edition. We'll put out in a year anyway, and we'll try to coop the savings then. Yeah. Versus we could push it a year, but that's another year we got to pay the salaries and the staff and the people, and then maybe the game is really great, and we do have to pay out those bonuses too. And so yeah, like, I mean, their thinking is, yeah, maybe it only sells 89%, but it's still 80 or 90% right now that we can have, versus waiting a year and, maybe it does or doesn't do better.
Yeah, and so much of the current economies of the industry is built around pre-orders. So it is like, let's get all those rubes to buy the game before anybody else has ever touched it. Let's just sell them on the game, sell them on the game, sell them on the game, get our money from them, and we don't care at that point how good it is. Like, so the game can come out, it can be a bad game, we still got their money, and yeah, people might be like, fuck them, I'm not going to do that next time, and then they forget because they get hyped by the next time we show them a trailer of something, and then they do it again. Like, the fact that...
As long as the game is good enough for a sequel, we're set.
Yeah. The fact that, like, you're, like... try to figure out how to articulate this. Ubisoft games, notoriously at this point, are all on sale like a month after they've released. Watch Dogs Legions, Valhalla is like $35 right now, 2 months later, whatever. Like, they clearly made enough on the pre-orders and the sale and pre-sales of the game. Like, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I want to say, was one of the top 20 best-selling games of last year, with all of a month and a half on the market or whatever, because Ubisoft has kind of, really worked out that kind of side of the market. So they got most of their revenue that they're going to get off that game before it ever hit store shelves. So now they can get away and they can afford to try and entice the people that are, more, savvy or whatever, buying the game after. And it's going to take the consumers as a whole, not just like one person saying I'm voting with my wallet or whatever. It's going to take everybody basically saying, hey, what if we don't buy these games before anybody has ever touched them? Let's see how they are. I would love to see demos become like a thing again as a result of CD Projekt, and basically like, hey, you have to like, we don't like, I would love to see Sony and Xbox basically like mandate, you are going to create a demo that these people can play to try out your game. And we see it a lot with like, Nintendo's been doing it a lot recently, where it's like, your progress will carry over from the demo into the proper game, but give people a chance to try the thing first, no, investment, then let them see if they want it. Because then you have a more educated consumer. But people will continue pre-ordering. People will continue kind of being succumbed by the hype. I say this all, knowing full well I buy stupid collector's editions that I don't need at all. I pre-ordered Hitman 3 just so I can, have that hopped on, pre-installed and ready to go. Despite the fact that I've never really gotten into Hitman in the past.
We're doing Hitman streams
here. Hell, as it is, like, because with Hitman, it's like, hey, if you have the previous games, you can play them all within the Hitman 3 client. I was like, well, I have Hitman 1. I had the box, I think, somewhere around here. And I was like, you know what? Hitman 2's on sale for like $20. I'll buy that. So I've got all of Hitman ready to go when it pre-installed today, basically, preloaded today. And like that game could come out and be terrible, and I'm just as much of an idiot for doing that myself.
Sure.
But yeah, like the fact that somebody like Ubisoft can look at their books and basically say like, hey, it's not going to hurt our bottom line if 2 months after the fact we're already cutting the prices of these games in half and selling them, or like especially for like Watchdog Legions before the holidays, like, hey, yeah, go buy this game that came out 3 weeks ago is now on sale for half price. Buy it before Christmas or whatever. And so they're going to clean up a little bit more money on that, but I imagine they, much like the movie industry, get so like probably 90% of their revenue from like those pre-orders / opening week sales. That the rest of it is just, hey, let's try and gobble up a little bit extra money, and if we have to cut the price to do it, so be it. We've already made whatever numbers we wanted to make, and this is just going to be icing on the cake, I guess.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on this.
We just kind of did
at this point. Yeah, but I will just say that.
And your hiccups are still there.
Hiccups still there. The industry needs, just almost like capitalism needs some pretty drastic reforms, guys.
It's almost like the ESA is a worthless organization that does nothing.
Oh yeah. I forgot about that. Old input punching bag as well. Yeah, fuck the ESA. But that will be the show. That's I think a good note to leave it on. In fact, that conversation. Fuck the ESA. If you like what you heard. Oh wait, I have a shout out. Let me pull it up right here. The shout out is a editorial from Kotaku by Zack Zwiezen. I'm sorry, Zack. Called "The New York Times is Worried Kids Are Playing Video Games Too Much During the Pandemic." The New York Times had on the front page of their paper how kids are playing video games too much again. The dad told his son he was a failure as a father because his son was just playing video games during the pandemic where he couldn't do anything or go outside or see any of his friends in real life. God help that poor family. No, I mean, it's
somebody think of the children.
Yeah, the editorial goes into it. Me and Trevor talked about it a little bit before the pod. Again, the video game industry's recurrent theme of being the biggest boogeyman since television, which was the biggest boogeyman since movies, which were the biggest boogeyman since continue onwards to people carving
since novels written by women.
Yeah, again, as me and Trevor joked, like, God help all these newfangled, electronic devices and gadgets. Let's go back to the good old days where plays and books were written and nothing was controversial in either one of those. Nothing was ever violent in books or plays or anything like that. They certainly would love it back in Shakespeare's time where men played women. They would love it. It would have no issues with that at all.
The Bible, Old Testament, like very, very calm, no, very non-violent kind of activities.
Yeah.
all through.
So yeah, it's that thing for me of, as always, it is on one hand deeply, deeply laughable. It is the quintessential old man screaming at the sky, and at the other saying a very tired refrain. I feel bad for the kid who got fucking blasted by his parents on the front page of, arguably America's biggest newspaper, just for playing games with bros online because they can't see them in a pandemic. Sorry about editing that, Trev, but it's I don't know. Like, I think I hate the argument to begin with, but it's just even more so with, like, what do you want this? He can't go outside. He, like, literally can't leave the house. Like, what do you want him to do? Like, just, like, read a book every day? Like, he probably wants to talk to his friends occasionally on his phone. Because that was another, like, they went into, like, tablets and phones, too.
Exactly. Screen time being like, well, everybody's in front of Zoom all day now. It's like,
what do you...
Yeah.
he can't leave. He can't see his friends. Like, do you want him to just be like, grow up to be like a lonely, antisocial guy? I don't want my kids to be like that. So, but nonetheless, the Grand Wizards over at the Times who wrote it and edited it know better than us. And so go read Zack's good Kotaku editorial, which kind of takes it to task a little bit. Trev, do you have any shout-outs?
No article shout-outs or anything like that, no.
We're wrapping it up then. If you like what you heard, first off, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope you liked what you watched as well. Give a shout out to Trevor Starkey over there who took care of all that.
It was a pretty straightforward episode this time. It's just you and I looking at our cameras.
You can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite like all of our wonderful patrons have. Thank you all. You keep the lights on and make shows like this and like that D+ happen. And we're very, very grateful for that. And we're very excited for year 2 of That Nerdy Site and all the new ideas and fun gizmos and gadgets and whatnot that we have planned for you. Like I said, maybe you'll see me and Trevor goofing off in Hitman together very soon. I wish that game was co-op. But nonetheless, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can also go support us by liking the podcast, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing on podcast services all around the globe. I just had 2 people tell me this past weekend they're going to check the show out. So that's something. I appreciate you. But otherwise, you can go rate reviews on iTunes or other podcast services that have rating things. I know iTunes is like the big one. Go do that. Give us 5 stars. Tell us why you liked us. It'll mean the world to us. It'll make me very happy. And maybe I'll give you a hug once the pandemic is over. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey. Trevor, anything that you want to plug?
You can go check out all of our Game of the Year, like best of 2020 stuff over at That Nerdy Site. We each had our personal top games lists went up as written pieces, as well as kind of the site-wide list that I kind of curated based off of kind of our collective lists. That's out there. And then also the day before this one goes live, so Tuesday of this existing week, I recorded a Let's Play of my first chapter of Scott Pilgrim the game. I was very excited.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, that is should be up on the YouTube stuff now. It's about a half hour of me just kind of on the struggle bus through the first level of that game, kind of enjoying my Scott Pilgrim nostalgia and completely forgetting how much of a kick in the face that game can be until you like kind of grind a little bit and level up.
Yeah, I absolutely will second all the shout-outs for Trevor. Those are both the good ones. You can go find me at LeftyLoggy, LoggyLoggy. I will give a shout-out, as Trevor said, I will second the Game of the Year list. That was a lot of fun, and it was a good conversation and back and forth on that. I will give a shout-out to Trevor's list in particular. He did a top 20 with honorable mentions, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And they're all very fun. I went through and read all the people's lists as they went live, but his and all the like special game award game title things he gives each game as well are great. He read some of them out on the like Game of the Year podcast, a nearly 5-hour long behemoth.
Yeah. Did you see the little jab I took at you in the overall site one?
Oh, I just assumed that. Yeah. I also because I was going to give you a shout out as well for I mean, it's a weird shout out, I guess, but I'm going to do it anyway, is the Twitter thread Trevor did as well was very well put together, I thought, and very, very nice, and Trevor worked real hard on it. It was really good.
Way more thought went into our thumbnails than probably needed to is basically the crux of that thread, but yes.
No, that thread's great. That thread's great, though. And yeah, Trevor's detail and everything and the kind of thought process behind it all. I loved it. I live for that kind of nerdy-ass kind of minutia. So go check that Twitter thread out. Otherwise, I will say, yeah, Game of the Year, and then look forward. Next week, Hitman. Yeah, Hitman comes out next week.
Comes out this week. Comes out the end of this week.
Comes out Friday.
It it like I said, it pre-installed on my. I was playing Yakuza Kiwami 2 today, and started getting the Hitman 3 installing notifications on my system. So
comes out this Friday, this weekend. Stay tuned for stuff on that. I'm sure we will have something around it. I'm pretty excited about it. Trevor has bought 3 games of it, so he's invested at the very least.
I think I'll have some fun trying to maybe stream it this weekend.
Yeah, I very much hope so, because I will be very excited to dive into that as well and join your stream. And it's a lot of fun. There's some fun things we can do with Hitman. So stay tuned to all of that. Otherwise, you can go follow That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for my hiccups, this has been That News You Care About. Play your games and be good to each other.